Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me for this study. This study enriches my life. I enjoy it a lot, even though I study it many occasions. It's always refreshing, and there is no ideas that come when you study the same thing over a year later. Today, we are studying the portion of Lecha, and we are introduced for the first time to Abraham, the first Jew. We are not going to be able to cover the entire topic, as the Rabbi finds more, digging for more gems. It's just fascinating. But just to show how a deep layer is not enough, but we're going to go into a second, deeper layer than the first layer. And the Rabbi is actually, in his talk, will go to 2 more layers, I believe, but I'm sure we won't have time. I'm going to read, and I believe that the way I read, it will go very quick, because the idea, the point, is should be very easy to understand, at least at the beginning. And the verse at the beginning of our portion, by the way, I'm reading from the Likutei selections from Likutei Sichos, the third talk of the Rabbi, which is on page 144. And the verse, "Go out from your land, your birthplace, and I will make you unto a great nation." Ramban comments, this is the first time we're introduced to Abraham. God says to Abraham, leave your homeland, leave your country, leave your birthplace to a land that I will show you, without naming the place. Ramban comments the following: this passage does not explain the entire matter. It states that the Holy One, blessed be He, instructed Abraham to leave his land and promised him that He would grant him divine favor that had never before been granted to anyone. God says to him, I'll make you to a great nation, and I will be with you. So this is a gift that no one else received before. Nevertheless, the Torah does not mention the reason for these blessings. It does not preface with the fact that Abraham was a servant of God, nor that he was perfectly righteous man. The manner in which Scripture generally speaks is first to say, proceed before me, or heed my voice, and then, that is, as a consequence, I will grant you favor, as is stated with regards to David and Shlomo. Similarly, with regards to the entire Torah, it is written, if you walk in my status, I will grant you. And if you will certainly need the voice of God, your Lord, He will. Also, our patriarch Yitzchak was promised divine favor for the sake of Abraham, my servant. However, there is no apparent reason for God to have promised Abraham such divine favor merely because he would leave his land. Do you understand the question? Every single time in the Torah, when God is granting a gift or a reward, He tells us beforehand for what reason. Noah. We read Noah was a righteous man, he walked before God, and therefore God says to him, you are the one to be saved and build an ark, I will bless you. Yitzchak, because of your father Abraham. King David, King Solomon, God says to them, because you walk before me, I'm granting you such and such rewards. Here God says to Abraham, leave your homeland, leave your birthplace, and I will grant you great reward. I will make you unto a nation, and I will be the closest, you will be the closest that ever human being is going to be, you children. We don't write for why. Even though there is a whole history in the background of Abraham searching for God, breaking the idols, as everyone is familiar with the story, yet the Torah is avoiding the whole background and starts immediately with the reward that Abraham is receiving without telling us why. This is Nachmanides' question, a commentator, it's not the Rabbi. The commentator, Nachmanides, is asking that question. In resolution, Ramban, Nachmanides explains that Abraham was granted this unique favor because of the commitment to God's service that he had demonstrated beforehand, the inhabitants of Ur Kasdim. This is what he says. Nachmanides' answer, very briefly, as we're going to read it, is because Abraham, for many years, had put his life on the line for God's sake, and therefore he deserved to be rewarded. Here is what he says. The inhabitants of Ur Kasdim, the fact that he lived in Ur Kasdim, by the way, Ur Kasdim is a place in Iraq today. It's an ancient place that's known as the birthplace of Abraham. caused them great hardships because of his faith in the Holy One, blessed be He. And Abraham fled from them to go to the land of Canaan. In the interim, he interrupted his journey and lingered in Haran. Haran is in the middle between Ur Kasdim and the land of Canaan. God also told him to leave that place to do as he had originally thought, that is, to go to Canaan, so that his service of God and his efforts to have people call upon God's name would be carried out in the chosen land. There, Abraham's renowned word would be amplified, and the inhabitants of Canaan would be blessed through him. In other words, Nachmanides says basically what he's saying is, at the Torah in this week begin in the middle of the story. Abraham for years had sacrificed his life. He was placed into a fiery pit for refusing to worship idols. He broke all the idols and he mocked them. And he was able to cause many people to connect to God. Now he realizes there is no future in Ur Kasdim because the people hate him, so he leaves to go to the land of Canaan. On the way, he takes a pit stop in Haran. Haran is somewhere in the middle, and he decides to linger, and he takes his time. God comes to him in this expression and says, no, keep going, because I chose you to be the one to represent me and the one to convince all the inhabitants about God, and therefore you need to continue to the land of Canaan. This is Nachmanides. Ramban continues, stating that the Canaanites would respond to Abraham in a positive manner, in contrast to the inhabitants of Ur Kasdim, who denigrated and cursed him, placing him in a dungeon or casting him into a fiery furnace. And therefore Ramban concludes, in other words, God says to Abraham, the people in Ur Kasdim are bad people, they don't care about you, they don't like you. You need to go to a place where people respect you and love you and influence them to connect to God. Nevertheless, the Torah did not desire to elaborate upon the beliefs of the idol worshippers and explain in details the interaction between Abraham and the inhabitants of Ur Kasdim regarding faith, just as it curtailed the description of the generation of Enosh and the conception of idolatry that they contrived. In other words, the Ramban says the reason the Torah omits this whole story is because once you get into the details, you're going to describe also the idol worshippers, how they worship idols, and what Abraham did to cause them their anger, and the methods, the techniques of idol worshipping. And God felt that it does not belong in the Torah. We don't need to know about it. And therefore, because of that, God has omitted the entire background as to why God is rewarding Abraham to become the chosen people and blessed with children forever to be serving God and being God's people. Did you understand so far?
Yeah.
So again, we had a question. How come the Torah in this week's portion starts in the middle of the story? And in addition, it should give us the reason why is he rewarded. That's Nachmanides. Nachmanides responds is if he would go to explain to us why, that God will end up writing and recording in the Torah the idol and the techniques and methods, and God don't want to, and therefore God omitted it.
So
yes,
it also starts in the middle of the journey.
Not in the middle of journey, in the middle of the story of God's relations to Abraham.
Yeah, I'm going to say, but in terms of Abraham's move from where he was, or Kasdim, it really starts out in the middle of that journey.
Correct.
And he decides
to
himself,
stop. Abraham, yes.
Decides himself to go to Canaan.
He picked on his own that he don't want to stay in his own land.
But he picked also another.
And by the way, we read about it last week. The last verses in the Torah last week, it says that his father picked him up and says, let's leave the place. And there is reasons for it. He saw no future. They get stuck in Haran for many years, by the way.
His father was with him?
Yes, and his father died in Haran. This is last week's portion. The conclusion is that Vayama Terach beCharan. That's the last words in the portion of last week. So Terach died there. He was there for a couple of years. God comes to him and says, no, keep going to the land of Canaan because you're going to be respected and be famous. And I'll reward you for that, for choosing you to the...
was from Haran, not from Ur Kasdim.
Correct. Of course.
Okay.
Haran was the midpoint in Canaan?
No, Haran is the midpoint between Ur Kasdim and Canaan.
But it sounds like his initial motivation to leave Ukasdim was he wanted to go to Canaan.
That is the first desire.
But that wasn't because God
But
said
it didn't
that.
happen. No, God didn't say anything.
It just happened
Actually, it
between
wasn't
them.
him. The Torah tells us that his father picked him and his nephew Lot, whose father died, and another son who, and they started a journey towards the land of Canaan. They were Bedouins. They were nomads. So they travel around, as we see. Abraham also, once he arrived in Israel, what does he do? He keeps looking around. He's circling all over. Why? Because they need a place to feed their animals. According to Kabbalah, it was to inspire people. Therefore, he kept moving around to inspire, to reach out. But let's talk about the simple text. The Torah last week tells us that Terach, his father, picked his family, including Abraham, and he says to them, "It's time to leave." Now they got stuck in Haran. Haran, let's say between Ukasdim and Israel, there is 2,000 miles. 1,000 miles later, they come to Haran, they camp and they stay there. They change plans. They are not moving into the land of Canaan. Now in this explosion, God comes to Abraham and says, no, I want you to keep going, but I will reward you to become a nation that is chosen by me to be the closest. I will bless you. I'll make you famous. And you'll be a blessing to your surrounding. In other words, this is a treasure of blessings that no one else before, and yet we don't find why. What's the reason? We have the background in the Medrash, and Nachmanides explains the Torah chose not to put the background and the reason, so not to allow for the idol worshippers to have their spot in the Torah, under the spot. Is that clear so far?
Yes.
The Rabbi is not clear. The Rabbi is not so easy going with this. However, says the Rabbi, so far again, it is Nachmanides, it's not the Rabbi. Nachmanides Ramban, who was in the 10th century, about the same time as Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, is the one who points it out. As the Rabbi, however, clarification is still called for. Why? Why doesn't the Torah mention, at least briefly, that Abraham was a servant of God or a perfectly righteous man as a preface to the verse? And God says to Abraham. In other words, Rabbi says, I understand. You're giving me a reason because you don't want to give space for the idol worshipping. You don't have to. You can just say Abraham was righteous, walking before God, and God said to him.
Why is it an interrogative?
Indeed, huh?
It's okay, go ahead, maybe you'll get answers.
Indeed, at the beginning of Parshat Noach, before relating how God spoke to Noah, last week, it's just 1 week ago, the Torah states Noah was a righteous man, and even before that, at the end of Parshat Bereshit, the Torah says, and Noah found favor in the eyes of God, without mentioning in specifics what the other people did, that Noah was separated from them and did differently. In other words, why doesn't the Torah preface the beginning with mentioning that Abraham was a righteous man walking before God? How much more so would it have been appropriate to make similar statements with regards to Abraham, since our sages describe at length his greatness of character, his righteousness, and his service of God to the point of self-sacrifice in Ur Kasdim and in Haran. In other words, Rabbi says, comparing to Noah, Abraham put on line a lot more than Noah. He put his own life. Noah never sacrificed his life. Abraham was put into a fire furnace and he refused to worship idols. So he did way, way more than Noah, yet the Torah is not saying anything. This divine service was a preparatory step and the reason leading to God's instructing him, go out from your land. Nevertheless, Scripture mentions nothing whatsoever regarding this. Indeed, in describing how Terach and his family, Terach is the father of Abraham, left Ur Kasdim, Abraham is mentioned only as a member of the family. He is not singled out from the others. Says the Rabbi, nothing about Abraham. In addition to the fact that Noah was only responsible for his generation, Abraham is going to be rewarded and the one that's responsible for the Jewish people for all generations to come. So at least say something. He put online.
No, the entire world, though. Everywhere, not just Jews.
Right. Okay. I hear you. But we benefit from Abraham. You're right, actually. But Noah, the Torah says, he was righteous, walked before God, and therefore God is singling him out to save the universe. Abraham, not only righteous, walking before God, put his life on the line. He was willing to be burnt. And yet the Torah mentioned nothing of it, no introduction, not saying Noah walked before God. And in addition to the questions that Manatee he mentioned about King Solomon, King David, all the time, whenever God rewards the righteous, we are getting to be introduced to the person first for their good behavior, and then we understand why. Here there is no mention whatsoever.
Do we have an
We
answer?
need to get the answer.
Well, but Noah, of course, was righteous in his time. So God throws in this phrase.
There
and
is
it
a
becomes
dispute.
More of a question.
Well, there is a dispute.
Yeah, and
Some
there's
say that
a
it's a
dispute,
greatness,
right? Yeah,
right? That if in
Some
his...
say it's not. Right.
Some say not.
Anyway,
Says the Rabbi, the resolution to this issue can be, we are on page 147. Are we clear so far? Leon, are you following us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. The resolution of this issue can be elucidated by the following preface. The existence of the Jewish people began with Abraham. Says the Rabbi, if we understand that our very existence as Jewish people started with Abraham, we will be able to understand why no mention of his past. In other words, by the way, the Rebbe is addressing the question of Nachmanides to a way that will alleviate all the question altogether. Here it is. He was the first Jew, as is written, Abraham was one, that is unique among all the people living at that time. He was the only one connected to God as a Jew. With regards to Abraham himself, his distinction from the other inhabitants of his birthplace and his parents' home began when God says to Abraham, go out from your land, your birthplace, and your father's home, as stated at the beginning of this parsha. Says the Rebbe, here is the preface to the answer. Abraham was granted to be the beginning, to start a new nation, the chosen nation. When does it all start from? In the beginning of this week's portion, where God tells them, go out from your land, from your birthplace, leave your homeland to the place that I'll show you. This is the first commandment that God is giving the first Jew. This is the manner in which the Torah begins describing Abraham's uniqueness. True, well before then, Abraham recognized his Creator, drew close to him, and made known to all humanity that there is one God in the entire world and that it is fitting to serve him. Way before this is Maimonides tell us that Abraham recognized God on his own and he was not shy about it. He made sure to share it with everybody. It all happened before. Even while in Ur Kasdim, while he was still in his homeland, his commitment reached the level of self-sacrifice. But the Torah does not mention this. It begins the narrative of Abraham with Lech Lecha. Everything in the past has nothing to do with Abraham getting chosen to become the leader or the start of the Jewish people. By doing so, the Torah defines and highlights the nature of Abraham and of his descendants, the Jewish people, and of every individual Jew. This is the Kabbalah, says the Rabbi. If you want to know what defines the Jewish people, what defined Abraham as the first Jew, you got to look in the Torah. For the first time, the Torah records an interaction between God and Abraham. There was a lot of interaction before. There was a lot of sacrifices before. There was a lot of spreading God's name before. But to become a chosen person as a mandate or as a way of life or purpose of life for the rest of Jewish people, you got to look at the first commandment, the first interaction that's mentioned in the Torah, and that is, go out from your homeland, from your birthplace. All other nations, and here is the Rabbi is going to a philosophical discussion. It's maybe a little out of line, but it's necessary to understand. So I'm going to go again very quick. All other nations define their closeness to and relationship with the Creator according to their knowledge and awareness of Him. Any other nation, you have different denominations. They define their relationship with God based on the way they understand God, their God, or the way God relates to them. It starts from the Greek gods until modern day or the Far East gods. They establish a bond with Him and fulfill His commandments. The Jewish people, however, follow a different motif. Their primary closeness to God and their identity as Jews do not originate in their own efforts at elevating themselves to attain an awareness of God and to establish a relationship with Him, but rather in God's having selected them. To refer to our sages' words, and now the omnipresent drew us close to His service. This is a prayer we say on the Agada, the first time when we became free people. He chose to draw us close to His service, and the omnipresent drew us close to Him, distinguished us from the other nations, and drew us close to His unity. What the Rabbi says, the key distinction between the Jewish people's relationship to God versus other nations bond together and choose God. They learn about their God, they learn how to relate to that God, and they try to please that God and make that God be among them.
The opposite of us.
Jewish people were chosen by God. We had no say. God has chosen us to be His people, and therefore the first relationship a Jew will have with God is when God comes and gives a command and says, that's what you should do, and I will choose you to be my people. In that way, the uniqueness of a Jew is unparalleled to any other religion. Since this relationship was initiated by the Creator, it is easily understood that the Jewish people are not merely another category of created beings, similar to all other created beings, but distinguished in that they have drawn closer to God than others. Instead, the Jewish people are of an altogether different nature. Says the Rabbi, the uniqueness of a Jew is not just the relationship they have with God, because other nations have a relationship with God. The uniqueness is that God has chosen them versus they choose God. All other nations, they choose their God. They vote for God. They become religion. Jewish people have nothing to say about it. No say. It was God who chose them. All other created beings are defined as just that, something that God created. The Jews are different fundamentally, as a Jew is godliness that has been invested in the creation. When God chose us, He says, you're going to be my representative. You are a part of me. Even as He exists on the physical plane, a Jew's soul is an actual part of God from above. So too, with regards to the body of a Jew, it is explained that in Kabbalah, that the phrase, and you chose us from among all peoples, refers to the bodies of the Jewish people. Not only the neshama, but also the body is chosen by God. Therefore, it was infused with godly spark that is part of God walking around. There exists a parallel difference distinguishing between the mitzvot given to all of mankind and the mitzvot given to the Jewish people. Now the Rabbi says that will explain the major difference between the commandments that were given to other nations versus the commandments given to the Jewish people. The difference between these two sets of commandments is not merely quantitative, that is, that mankind as a whole is given 7 commandments and the Jews 613, not just in the numbers, but rather qualitative. The mitzvot given to the Jews are of an entirely different nature. Now we can understand, says the Rabbi, look at the commandments God gave the Jewish people versus the commandment God gave to the nations of the world. It's not just a quantity distinction, but a quality. Why? Fundamentally, the commandments given to mankind as a whole are intended to establish a stable environment, to refine humanity, ensuring that mankind conducts itself in accordance with God's will, and that the world function as He desires. In other words, the 7 commandments is don't steal, honor your parents, appoint judges, believe in God, so God know you, God is watching. All the commandments, what they are, is about preserving the universe, keeping this out of the jungle, and keeping us as a place, a safe and a happy place.
7 Noahides.
You're looking for 7 laws of Noah. So they are, the first 3 are the ones that are the cardinal laws of the Jewish people. They are idol worshipping, forbidden to worship idols, murder, and the third one is to believe in God. No idol worshipping, idolatry. I'm sorry, adultery. Idolatry, murder, and adultery. And then you have 4 more. And the 4 more are in the word made out of a word of 4 letters, and I forgot, but they are one: no pain to the animals, respecting parents,
Legal system.
judges, appointing judges and police officers, and צער בעלי חיים, Mishpatim, and feathers, and there is one more.
No idols?
Idols is one of the 3 I already mentioned. There are 7 laws of Noah. That's no pain to animals. So that's number 4. Yeah, so we have 7.
Keeping Shabbos is not one of them. That's for us and us only.
Right. So the purpose of the 7 laws of Noah, it's not just that God gave them much less, but their commandments is preserving the humanity and the universe. Animals, the land, parents, God, adultery, idolatry are for the preserving of a sane lifestyle. And the perfecting of the world and of humanity are achieved through mankind's fulfillment of the mitzvot with which they are charged. This is the reason that the mitzvot given to mankind as a whole comprise matters whose merits can even be appreciated by human understanding. They all make sense. Every one of the 7 laws of Noah makes sense. In contrast, the mitzvot given to the Jewish people are not intended solely for the sake of the refinement of the individual and the world, but also and primarily as a means of bonding with and connecting to the Creator. Indeed, the Hebrew word for mitzvah has the same root letters as the word tzavta. Tzavta meaning bond. Every mitzvah a Jew performs establishes a bond with and connection to the Creator. Did you understand that? So if you're looking at the commandments, God gave the non-Jews 7 laws. Common sense, makes sense. Don't worship idols because God gave you life, is a source of life. You got to be kind to Him. Honor your father and mother. Don't hurt animals. Have a justice system. Huh?
We left out one God. One God.
Right, I said it. No idol worshipping. That's the first one.
You said idolatry.
I said idolatry, adultery, murder.
And plus one God is 4.
What is he saying? I don't understand.
Those 3 you mentioned. There's 7 laws, right?
Right.
One of them has to do with idolatry. The 3 you mentioned.
Idolatry and one God is the same thing.
I thought it's 2.
No.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there are 4 more. Adultery, idolatry, and murder are 3. The other 4 are be kind to animals, justice system,
Yeah.
parents, honor your parents, and there is one more. I'll tell you.
Seven Noahide laws.
Idols worshipping or Birkat Hashem, not to curse God.
Blasphemy, right?
Blasphemy.
Yeah.
Murder, adultery, robbery, gezel, ever minachai, a limb from a living animal, pain to animals, and the last one is justice system.
So there's no honor thy father and mother there?
Nope. I thought there was, but there isn't. Okay. So we have 7 laws of Noah. Okay?
So the 3 that are excluded are honoring the parents, Shabbos, and what's the other one?
All the other commandments are excluded. What do you mean?
All 613 commandments.
All right, some of which make no sense.
Oh, of each one, the 613.
Yeah.
Some of which make no sense, right?
Majority.
Who gave it?
Well,
Yeah, it is
Oh, yeah.
majority. Who gave it? Chuki?
Majority of the
Chuki?
commandments make no sense. All the sacrifices don't make sense.
Okay, they're chuki? Okay.
There are many other commandments that make no sense. So, says the Rabbi, the reason God gave the non-Jews, the rest of the universe, commandments is for the preservation of the humanity and the universe. Therefore, they make sense. God's chosen people, the Jewish people, were given commandments that makes no sense. And the reason is because they're chosen by God to connect to God, and therefore, not necessarily we can understand them. As that feeds into the idea that the first Jew that is chosen by God is unique in the way that he is chosen by God and not he choosing God. Is that clear so far? A created being and the Creator are entirely incomparable, and as such, the existence of created being is in and of itself utterly insignificant to the Creator. Accordingly, it follows that a created being's service, his efforts to draw close to God, is in and of itself insignificant to him. The way in which one achieves a bond with God is neither through self-refinement and efforts at elevating himself through coming to the knowledge and awareness of God, nor through his expressions of lofty spiritual feelings, but through doing what God chose us to do and charged us with, that is, through fulfilling his commandments. Did you understand that? In other words, whatever we do, no matter how lofty, no matter how spiritually refined we are, it is totally insignificant before God, because God is totally out of the universe. God is in a different category. It's just like there is no comparison. But God wanted to have a relationship. God wanted us to get close to him. So what does he do? He chose us. He gave us commandments. Now when you please God, you are creating a relationship with God. If it would come from us choosing God and learning how to please God and serving God, it's so insignificant it has no effect.
Except for the boxes.
No, I'm talking outside the Jewish connection. But now that God has chosen us and give us a commandment, go, it tells Abraham, and he says to him, for that I will reward you. In other words, I reward you for making you the people. Now we can affect God. Now we can have a relationship because that's God's choice. The way I explain that idea all the time is if you have a little child, a child just learned to walk, 2.5 years old, and Professor Einstein is thinking deeply about a new idea of relativity plus 3. And if he was to try and explain it to the child, it's totally is gonna short the brain cells there, right? If the child tells the professor, I can connect to you because I can listen to you or understand you, it's no relationship. But what if Einstein, while he's deep thinking, he lost his pencil? The pencil fell off his hand. And he tells the child, it's hard for me to bend over, can you get me the pencil? When he grabbed, the little child grabbed the pencil and give it back to Einstein, he has now established a relationship. He thanks them, and he's happy, and he's pleasing him. In other words, when it comes from the higher up, causing for a relationship, there is an opportunity. When it comes from us below, it will never be. Now, God is way farther than Einstein. Way. And the distance between Einstein and the child is immeasurable compared to the relationship between us and God. However, God tells Abraham, I want you to do something for me. And if you do, I want you to be representing me and have my part of what I am all around the universe. Now, it doesn't have to make sense. Because the commandment is to bond. It's not that God needs it. God does not need it. God has many ways to achieve whatever he wants. But he has chosen to have a relationship with us through the commandment. So when I keep Shabbat, when I keep kosher, when I say something kind to a fellow, I am serving God. Why? Because God chose that, and therefore it shouldn't make sense. It's nothing to do with common sense. When the child is asked to pick up the pencil, it doesn't have to make sense to the child. The child has no idea what a pencil is. He doesn't know what to use a pencil. He knows only something you put in your mouth. As soon as you put it in your mouth, everybody is going to scream. But for Einstein, it's necessary. He has to write his revelations. When the child picks up the pencil and give it to Einstein, everybody is happy here, and a relationship was established. Now Einstein will remember, ask him for his name, and thank him publicly next time he speaks, because due to that child's behavior, he's able to write down and not lose his mind. That's the exact same idea, and that's why God chose to gave Abraham a commandment. It has nothing to do with being kind and walking before God and sacrificing himself, because that all is talking about the created being. And a relationship with God cannot be established from our created beings. Did you understand the answer? The Rabbi wants... is that clear?
It is. It's just interesting.
The Rabbi goes on 4 layers. This is only the first one. We are running short of time, but I want to go to one more point. The Torah, a created being. I'm reading again, page 150, the new paragraph. A created being and the Creator. We spoke about it, that there is no relationship. The Torah highlights this concept at the outset with regards to the first Jew. The beginning of the first man that is getting promised to be the first Jew, and the Jewish nation will be spreading forth, needs to be indicated by the first relationship recorded in the Torah. Our patriarchs, Abraham, the Torah does not begin describing his distinction as a Jew and his uniqueness as the father of our people with an account of his lofty personal qualities, or how he drew close to God through his divine service and by dint of his own efforts. Why? These are qualities that he possessed even prior to the time that he is mentioned in the Torah. Instead, the Torah introduces him to us by saying God spoke to Abraham, go out, that is, with God singling him out. In this way, the Torah informs us that his relationship to and bonding with God come about solely by virtue of his having been commanded by God and by his carrying out that command. So why was he chosen? Not because he put great sacrifice and he put his life on the line. It's because God chose him. And therefore, because God chose him, he says to him, the choice I'm making is because I want you to follow my commandments. When you follow my commandment, we can establish a relationship. Is that so far clear? The Rabbi points out the next point that I wanted to get to, and it's too late, so I'm going to give it to you verbally. The Rabbi points out that God could have given Abraham many commandments. He could have told him, open up a hostel. He could have told them, open up a restaurant. He could have told them, I want you to start studying my laws. He could have told them, I want you to go around and gather people to a minyan. But the first commandment that defines the start of a relationship is what? Go out from your place to the land that I will show you, so you can spread my word among the people. If a Jew wants to get to the basic of a relationship between God, the first thing is to go out from your inhabitant place to the birthplace, the family, and spread out the word. That's the commandment God chose as the precursor to the rest of the relationship. There are 2 types of schools of thought within Judaism. Some say you got to sit and study Torah all day. You become holy because you study God's Torah. You connect to God through the Torah. We create a bond with God. Others say you bond with God by going out from your birthplace, from your comfort zone. You're going out to reach out a fellow man who has no clue about God, and you reach him out and tell him there is a God. And that's why the first time God is bonding with a Jew by choosing to give us a commandment, the commandment is to go out of our birthplace, of our comfort zone, of our place of where everybody knows us, and go to a strange land and reach out to the community. And then God is promising to bless and make sure that you are successful. And as again, this is the second layer why that commandment in particular was chosen. The Rabbi has 2 more layers in this one talk about the idea of the beginning of this week's portion. Now we can understand the question of Nachmanides. It can be answered on a much different scale, that the reason God does omit all the past is because all the past was Abraham on his own volition. He came up with his research, in his own understanding, that there must be a one God, and there must be a God who has no shape or form. And therefore he was fighting for it, but it's without being commanded. and therefore it will never establish a relationship. In this week we read about God choosing Abraham by commanding him. Now you can establish a relationship, and therefore the commandments should not make sense, because if they make sense, they come from us, not from the Creator. I hope I made myself clear, and God willing, next week we'll continue.